Could I ask those in the chamber to stand, please? I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet tonight and pay respects to elders past and present. Could you bow your head in prayer? Almighty God, we humbly beseech Thee to vouchsafe Thy blessing upon this council. Direct and prosper its deliberations to the advancement of Thy glory and the true welfare of the people of the city of Clarence. Amen. Thank you. This meeting is being broadcast live on YouTube, and what's said at the meeting is not protected by privilege. There is a link to the agenda papers on Council's website. I note we have an apology from Alderman Newington and all others are present. Declarations of interest, Alderman or close associate, please. Alderman John.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to declare an interest in 8.4.1.
Any other declarations?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, Alderman von Berto also declares an interest in that item as well.
Okay, thank you. And I might point out that Alderman von Berto and Alderman Blomley are both meeting with us online tonight. Moving to item 4, and there are a number of items there we'll consider as an omnibus item. Go through each one in turn. Confirmation of minutes for the 11th of April as circulated be taken as read and confirmed. Are there any comments on the previous minutes? Thank you. Mayor's communication. First of all, it is with somewhat of mixed feelings that I announce the retirement of Mr. John Judge from our council staff. After nearly 57 and a half years of service, a truly remarkable and unprecedented amount of time of being employed by one employer, he is retiring. John has been an integral part of our organisation and has contributed in so many positive ways to our community through massive changes, which has seen the population more than double in his time on the council staff. His jobs have ranged from junior draftsman through to senior technical officer and project coordinator to his current position of manager of client services. When John commenced work on the 5th of July 1965, his starting wage was £10, 7 and 6pence per week, or in our today's currency about $22 a week. Council was in administration at the time when John started, and since then he has worked for 4 administrators, 6 wardens, 4 mayors, 2 council clerks and 5 general managers. It is an honour for me to acknowledge John's remarkable service to Clarence, and on behalf of Council wish him an enjoyable and fruitful retirement. Thank you.
I'd like to move a motion of appreciation for that.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Thank you, Alderman Warren. All those in favour? Alderman Blomley and von Berto?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Alderman von Berto?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And I declare the motion carried unanimously and congratulate John on a magnificent service. I'd also like to table Mayor's diary entries for the previous period, including those of the Deputy Mayor, and Alderman Kennedy also represented us at Anzac Day down at South Arm. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Item 4.3, Council notes the workshops conducted on the 26th of April and the agenda brief on the 29th of April. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In relation to council office accommodation, given council is considering short-term council office accommodation off-site, will the cost of accommodation be included as a line item in the budget estimates for 2022-2023?
Any approval will certainly require a line item in the budget, and that'll be considered as we go through the draft budgetary process and be evident in our budget that comes to a formal council meeting. So nothing can happen there unless that budget approval is in place.
Yeah, just supplementary, of course. that will be in the embodiment of the estimates.
No, I just made the point that it would be a line item and identifiable.
Okay, Mr Mayor, but it'll be included with all the other items. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I made the point that it would be evident as an item. Thank you. Item 4.4. Sorry, Alderman Mulder.
On that particular item, Mr Mayor, in those deliberations about council officer accommodation, has any thought been given to the $75,000 so generously offered by the state government during the last election campaign in relation to the refurbishment of the Rosny Golf Club, an item that we didn't actually, that the councillors, I believe, didn't even ask for?
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Look, we need to do a lot of work, and the plans need to come back to a workshop before any formal consideration. So the point that you've raised is noted, but it'll be one of the factors taken into account. Alderman Edmonds.
On the same topic, I would just like to get an appreciation as to how the City Heart consultation has fed into that discussion.
Thank you. Mr Pask, could I ask you to let us know what the plans are for going out on City Heart, the next step there, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the documentation for the expression of interest is being drafted currently internally, and we anticipate going out for advert in the next month or so.
I'm not aware of any ulterior motive to build council chambers on the golf course site. Alderman.
I didn't actually ask that question. What I actually asked was about all the money that has been spent consulting with the community so far. And if you want to go down that road, Mr Mayor, there was a declaration made that the former golf course would be a park. And I also don't know where that came from in the City Heart consultation. So I think it's important that when we talk about these big strategic decisions, there's consultation that's already occurred that seems to have been thrown in the bin.
There has been consultation already to some extent. We've called for ideas and a brainstorming from the general public. What we're doing now is going out formally, proposing to go out, and council has approved this for consultants.
Mr Mayor, I've lost you.
For consultants for the purposes of refining those original ideas. Certainly nothing's going to happen to that site without further consultation with the public. Okay, any more questions on that particular item? Thank you. Item 4.4, tabling of petitions. We have none at this stage. Are there any from the floor? Reports from outside bodies, single and joint authorities. First of all, the Copying Waste Authority. Thank you. Tas Water, there's nothing to report. For the Greater Hobart Committee, we met on the 27th of April, and the major item on the agenda there was that we've agreed to public consultation for the Greater Hobart Plan and the supporting strategy for growth and change. I expect that that will be within the next week or so. It'll be out for public consultation. We will be making a point of ensuring that each of the 4 councils and several of the adjunct councils will be formally briefed as part of that consultation process that's underway. And I'd like to table the communique from that meeting. Thank you. Reports from outside bodies, including the council and special committees. We have 3 there: the Natural Resource Management Quarterly Report, Bicycle Advisory Committee Quarterly Report, and Tracks and Trails Advisory Committee Quarterly Report. Are there any comments or questions in regard to those 3 reports? Thank you. Are there any other reports from representative bodies and committees? Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I table the Richmond Advisory Committee meeting of March, and also in supplement to the NRM report, the Clean the Plains report from the clean up in Clarence, Vale and Rugby in Australia Day?
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll take the mask off on this occasion. I'll table the Howrah Community Centre minutes of the 17th of February 2022, and the Tracks and Trails Advisory Committee meeting of the 17th of February 2022 and the special meeting of the Tracks and Trails of the 3rd of March 2022, and draw Council's attention to the discussion that centred around dogs on reserves and how in fact some of the dogs or dogs on lead in council reserves. This may have to be taken, Mr Mayor, in conjunction with Council's dog management review, which was considered last year. So that obviously will come to Council for consideration, and I think at the same time it was mentioned at the meeting that the decision of the major review that we undertook last year on the dog management policy, it would have to dovetail with what the recommendations have been submitted from the special meeting of the Tracks and Trails. So I make that comment, and for my colleagues to read and digest those very important comments that were made on the 3rd of March. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other reports?
Yes, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Von Berto.
I wish to table the 17th of February Positive Ageing Committee minutes, which have already been provided to the relevant officer for circulation.
Thank you, Alderman Von Berto.
Thank you.
No other reports. Moving on to item 4.8, the weekly briefing reports, that the reports of the 11th, 18th and 25th, the information in those be noted. Go ahead, Alderman Jones.
I was just waiting for the call, Mr Mayor, and I refer to the weekly briefing report of the 25th of April, the Clarence Aquatic Centre. On page 4, it refers to, amongst other things, the cost of replacement of the equipment. So I should have the page open. Repairs will require shutting down the electrical supply to isolate the switchboard, necessitating the closure of the centre. Contractors have now been engaged and the centre will be closed accordingly from the 13th of May and reopen on the 16th. My question through you to the appropriate officer. Is the officer...
Mr Graham might be able to help us here, if you'd like to put the question.
Yes, through you too, Mr Graham. Mr Graham, do we have an estimate of cost in relation to the work?
Through you, Mr Mayor, no, I don't have that at the moment, but I can certainly advise Alderman of those costs.
Thank you. Second question is in relation to the weekly briefing report of the 18th of April, and I refer to the current infringement/enforcement notice. The Southern Bay Investments Proprietary Limited has been on the boil for a number of months. Is the Acting General Manager able to advise as to whether the enforcement notice that was issued, appealed before the TASCAT, was withdrawn?
Mr Lovell might be able to help us with that.
Certainly. Mr Lovell, can you just advise as to why that is at the last minute has basically been withdrawn when this has been an ongoing matter for...
Mr Mayor, it concerns a legal matter, and my preference would be to do a memo clarifying the situation in more detail.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, if there are no other matters from the weekly briefing reports, I'd like to invite a motion that we adopt the officer's recommendation in all those items. Alderman Pearce, seconded Alderman Edmonds. All those in favour? Alderman Von Berto, are you in favour of adopting those? Thank you. Alderman Blomley? Thank you. Motion is carried unanimously. We have no matters under public question time or deputations by members of the public. So I now advise that Council's will be sitting as a planning authority under the Land Use Planning and Approvals Act. And we have... Sorry? Okay. We have a development application at 59 Esplanade Lindisfarne, 2 multiple dwellings. Moved Alderman Mulder, sorry, I take it you're moving?
Yes.
Thank you. Second, Alderman Pearce. Alderman Mulder, would you like to speak to it, please?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I'm moving for approval of this particular motion, but some of us may have been lobbied on behalf of this, which is, of course, very much appropriate, and I don't see any great, huge difficulties with these sorts of developments. But in the course of the lobbying, we're often told, and I'm assuming the rest of you are lobbying on the same thing, that this ticks all the boxes, that this conforms in every degree with the planning scheme. Mr Mayor, that's not quite right. If it did, it wouldn't even be here. We've got to understand something about this planning scheme, that there are acceptable solutions. These are the things that the project houses in all these developments that we're going, is why we're not overwhelmed, because the project houses do meet the acceptable solutions. It's when you try to go with the edges, that's when it doesn't become an acceptable solution. That's when it isn't totally compliant, and I'm quoting the words being used. We have to understand that when it's not totally compliant, we then need to go and have a look at the impact of this development, and we need to make some judgments. I loved the days when there was an acceptable solution and a range in which you could do it, but a maximum. Unfortunately, this single state use planning scheme has thrown out the idea of any maximum. Anything is possible and permitted, provided you can make the argument. Now, what we need to look at now is when these things aren't totally acceptable, why can't we need to have a look at, usually it's about amenity, and this one doesn't totally meet it, but the variables, the degree to which it impacts upon the amenities of the neighbours is, I would argue, as the officers do, not unreasonable. So let's get this thing. There has to be a subjective judgment in here about whether it's reasonable or not whether it is. In this particular case, I note the concerns, but it is reasonable. The judgment is reasonable. My only regret, and this is not the first time I've said this, is that had the developers spoken to the neighbours, maybe there wouldn't be any objections at all. Had they discussed the reasonableness of this, there may have been an adjustment to the development, which means we wouldn't be talking about it now. But this is a development. It isn't unreasonable. I just wish that some of the proponents would spend a little bit of time talking to their neighbours and making some adjustments before they got us to this particular position. I support this amendment. I do not believe it's... I support this application. I do not believe it's unreasonable, and therefore I will support it. But I do wish it had never come to us in the first place.
Thank you. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. Totally agree with the last speaker, but one thing I do want to just mention, the notification of advertising. We saw here 2 adjoining properties did not receive written notification, and the advertising period was extended 14 days, which I reckon is fantastic. And geez, I know myself that with Australia Post these days, I'm getting bills after the due date they're supposed to be paid, so I don't know. I'm not sure that was a council issue, to be perfectly honest. Now, also, one of the objections was height. We all know that, you know, it's not exceeding, the height is not exceeding 1.56 metres, and the height can be 8.5 metres. So I think, like Alderman Mulder said, this is a very reasonable proposal, and I support it, Mayor.
Thank you. Other speakers? Alderman Evans and then Alderman Warren. Okay, Alderman Warren.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I know this block of land well. It used to be a tennis court. For a number of years it was home to a very friendly goat. I used to drive past it on a daily basis. It's been empty for a long while. I think it's a shame that the development puts as much as possible on the block. Would have been a lovely place for a family home, lovely outlook. and family homes on either side, I think. Look, as the mover has said, the criteria is whether the loss of sunlight or solar access is reasonable or unreasonable. The officers have judged it to be reasonable. I'm sure the neighbours who are affected adversely would not agree. It's not reasonable for them to lose what they currently have, and again, it is a shame that negotiation couldn't have reached a more satisfactory solution. So while it is presumably within the limits of the planning scheme, I think it's a shame that we couldn't have done slightly better on this one.
Thank you. Other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Mulder. In that case, I'll put the motion which is recommending approval subject to conditions and advice. All those in favour? And Alderman von Berto?
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'm in favour.
Thank you. I think that's carried. Those against? And the motion is carried. I take it, Alderman Warren, you've abstained. Thank you. That concludes our business as a planning authority. Moving on to item 8.3.1, the fees and charges for 22-23, that they be adopted. Could I have a mover and a seconder for that, please?
So moved, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Alderman Mulder. Seconder. Alderman Kennedy, thank you. Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, the fees and charges are actually part of our budget process, and it's a complex matter to stand up here and say, hand on heart, I agree with every line item, every point, every rate fee, every charge, because I damn well don't, Mr Mayor. I've been long an argument for why are we charging our kids to play on our grounds that were built by their parents' ratepayer funds while we're busy handing out $500,000 annual fees to Cricket Australia to run a national competition on Bellarine Oval. If ever we wanted to give a hand, if ever we wanted to talk about sport and rec, if ever we wanted to do anything about engaging junior sport, this is a great opportunity for Clarence to become the centre of excellence, the greatest place in the world, on the best ovals in the world, in the best place, in the best access in the world, to use our grounds for free. But we always put a charge on them, and we always do this because guess what? I suspect they're not big business, so they don't get the thing. So I don't agree with that particular aspect. I campaigned on it I think back in 15 years ago when I first ran for council, and I've always maintained and I've always raised it. There are other issues too, the various votes and charges, but on balance, we have our opportunities. Some of these things need to be worked out 6 months ahead and not try to negotiate by an amendment at the last moment. So I support the fees and charges, but I flag once again my absolute desire that we create our sporting facilities, our recreational facilities, our tracks, our sports grounds should be on the same basis as our tracks and trails and our shared bicycle paths. More than that I cannot say.
Thank you. And Alderman Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Nothing much more to add to that other than, there's items here that I'm not totally in agreement with. But, it's really hard at this stage to pick winners. I love junior sport, I'd love to. There's lots of people you'd love to help. But, I think we've done a pretty good job as to where we've landed at the moment, so I'm happy to second it.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds and then Alderman Jones.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the comments of the previous two speakers and broadly agree. My issue isn't something that's come up last week or the week before. It's something we talked about during the first phase of the dog policy consultation. We've got an email trail that goes back to August 2021 over a lack of consultation with greyhound owners. I believe you've had similar issues with working dog owners about the sort of oversight in that consultation where they weren't part of it, and we formulated a policy. And to take a leaf out of the previous two speakers, we did move the fees and charges last year because, you know, as was said, you know, you can't get everything right every step of the time. My issue tonight is that I've been trying to get a proactive solution to this challenge for however many months ago August was, and sought advice, sought to do it through the quieter channels, sought to not carry on about it. But unfortunately, over that period, the problem obviously wasn't loud enough to get anything approaching a solution. So the issue with greyhounds, as in racing greyhounds, hasn't been solved. It's certainly been raised during our workshop process. It was raised in the, you can bring it up tonight or you can bring it offline and quietly try and find a solution, which again is what I tried to do. But it hasn't been dealt with, and we're at the 11th hour and it's raised, and now we have a solution that I wish I was told about months ago when I asked the question. And so we're looking at a motion next council meeting in 3 weeks, and whether that passes or not is something I would have preferred to have workshopped weeks ago, months ago, but it's not. So I guess we'll come down to a vote on the virtues of that or not, and I don't mind that because that's decision making in action. But I guess I'm just a little disappointed that you try to seek advice on things to deal with them in a professional board of directors sort of approach, and you don't get it. And, you know, we've got a paper trail even on that topic that goes back to early March. So I guess I'm just flagging my disappointment that this problem couldn't have been addressed and decided upon one way or another before we are where we are, because if we have a motion in 3 weeks, we've got at least 2 months of public consultation around that, which means we're going to end up with a stage where these imbalances in greyhounds and working dogs, by the sounds of it, aren't going to be dealt with before people have to pay for them. And then we're going to have to retrofit a solution that, as I said, we could have worked together on months ago to provide a seamless vote tonight and issues around those fees dealt with and not having to be worked backwards from. So I know this is probably confusing to people who might be tuned in, but I'm not supporting this tonight on the proviso that I supported it last year thinking we could work through solutions. We haven't worked through solutions, so I am not supporting it tonight. I look forward to finding out one way or another in 3 weeks whether we can find a solution to the issues.
Thank you. Alderman James.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and to echo Alderman Edmonds' comments, which is very eloquently put before the chair this evening. The simple fact of the matter is that the dog management review went through extensive consultation, and as a result of that, we're able to revisit that in a sense to be able to make any adjustments or changes in this particular case to greyhounds. And that was one of the key aspects that this council approved as part of the dog management review process last year. So what I'm saying in this place is that there is that opportunity to revisit this, notwithstanding the dog management review policy was signed off by council and so on. So I think that if this matter is brought as a notice of motion to the next council meeting, then there is that opportunity to steadfastly and lock into place, I believe, a change that would in fact be able to recognise the important aspect of greyhounds and how they are basically being incorporated into the dog pets that are now very widespread across the community. On another matter, if you look through the rates and charges, there have been very modest increases, and there has been a change in relation to where we designated the halls and how we applied the hall hire, room hire, kitchen hire and so on. And we've now brought into place a combination of bringing those halls up and being considered as combining those charges across all of those halls, and that by the very nature means that there is that common usage, because some of the halls in fact are used more frequently and often than others, and that has been identified as part of this review of the halls that council has throughout the city. The other matter that I want to raise is with respect to, and I will be supporting this because I think the officers have done a very good job to try to keep it at the very minimum of charges, and you're looking at a 2.2. In a couple of instances you can see that there has been an increase of 22.45%, but that was from a baseline of $9.80 to $12. So when you see that sort of number in the column on the rates and charges, that by the very nature can frighten you. But then if you look at the baseline and what it was over the years, it's an increase, okay, of a couple of dollars, but then the actual percentage is something that has been considered. And in the notation it says, and I quote, gradual increase to bring into line with other halls. So this particular hall that was obviously has been well utilised, but in fact the cost of use or hire of the hall had been at a very low base, and now it's being brought up pretty much in accordance with the other halls and is giving a return on investment, Mr Mayor, which I think we need to be able to do and have some estimate of how we maintain these buildings and keep on track as far as that is concerned. So I will be supporting this recommendation. It's out of kilter with what we've been used to over the years because we've usually had it within the setting of the rates. But that was a decision that this council made. I didn't support it. So, but then again, majority rules, as we are all aware of that circumstance. So here we have it. We have it identified as a separate item as part of the budget process, but I think overall it's been well worked, and I think the officers have done a good job to bring it onto a basis of where it's being fair and equitable to all users, and I support the officers' recommendation.
Thanks, Alderman James. Other speakers? Alderman Walker.
Look, I didn't think I'd find myself here a week ago. We did go through this process with a pretty reasonable comb. Fine tooth, maybe not lice fine, but very fine. And again, I can do the I hate this one's okay thing. We all can. And that's not the reason of my concern. The reason of my concern is fees aren't nebulous, a satellite by themselves, that they are interrelated with the rates. They're interrelated with the rates. So if we all go in here as we're awesome, we've got these fees and charges right down to this, aren't we awesome? Small burden on the rates. So, as I said last week, this night I was in a pretty comfortable place with this, and I was close to saying that I was in a comfortable place almost on the day that this was coming out. But inflation's hit at 5.1%, and here we are on average, 2.2%. So by my, satisfactory achievement, applied maths, that's putting more work. That's putting more work on the general rates. So I'm not here to say let's tax the school kids when they go and kick a ball on an oval. No, siree. And there have been some good measures with that. The state government's done some good things around vouchers, but I wonder whether, in light of 5.1%, we shouldn't be looking back over some of our other charges in planning in other areas and aligning it with that. And that is the reason that I'm not supporting it tonight. I'm not trying to go out and be a hero. I'm not trying to be a dog in a manger. But there is new information since we went through this process. The staff did a great job, but what is going to happen with a passing at this level means more burden on the general rates. So I don't know what we should be getting up to, but I think we should be looking back over this in light of that figure, and that's where I arrived at a place where, as I said, Monday last week wasn't even a back of mind issue, but it's really front of mind now. So the implications of that, I suspect, would be adding to the officer's workload, but as we go through the rates and processes, that's going to be quite taxing. So this is the opportunity now to think about whether we want to reflect on that, and that's where I've arrived at that place.
Other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Mulder.
Mr Mayor, where we find ourselves is a council that meets once every 3 weeks, that has significant involvement in workshops which are not public environments, and we lack the openness and transparency of an estimates committee process, which is a public matter. I, for one, don't believe that we should go down that path. A, we're not paid enough, and it's a cumbersome process. And even if you look at it in the state and federal parliaments, it's a process that occurs after it's all done and dusted. So we're really not in a position here. The commentary that I made is a general commentary. In the end, it's a mixture of concessions and a mixture of give a bit, take a bit, and all the rest of it. All I was doing was flagging that as a principle we might need to rethink this. I'm also not in favour of sitting here saying, well, the officers recommended, therefore we tick it off, because that's an abrogation of our responsibility as elected members to represent the council chambers. The comments about the CPI, I think, are less than genuine. Everyone's known from the day that COVID struck, the day we started to do everything, that interest rates were going to rise. It's been a discussion in the media for a long, long time. And the fact is that we can't start projecting how we're going to manage that until such time as we know what the quantum is. We cannot set a budget for 12 months based on the prospect of an interest rate rise next week. But what we can do is we can look at next year's budget and say, these have been the interest rate rise, this is the economy, this is why we pay people great money, big bucks, to do the financial management, the financial analysis. So the issues about interest rates and the consumer price index and inflation and those sorts of things are really questions for our next council meeting, for our next budget, and I would expect that we will be having some severe looks at that. So I would recommend that, although we are never happy, all budgets, all aspects of budgets are questions of negotiated settlements between all of us. And on that basis, I think we should endorse this one, and not to do so is basically saying, if I can't have my way, then I'll take the highway.
So the recommendation before the Chair is that the fees and charges for 22-23 be adopted. All those in favour? Alderman Blomley? Thank you. All those against? The motion is carried. Item 8.4.1, I have two that declared an interest. Alderman Bomberto, we can call you back in.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. I'll leave the meeting and I'll come back in when the General Manager or Acting General Manager lets me know.
Okay. .4.1, pardon me. Bit of residual there. 8.4.1, the Council approves the community support grants totalling $18,785.50 to community groups and organisations as listed in the agenda. Thank you, Alderman Kennedy. Seconded Alderman Edmonds. Alderman Kennedy, would you like to speak to it?
Just very briefly, Mr Mayor, as a member of the Grants Assessment Panel, I'd like to move this motion, take great pleasure in it, in fact, and also thank members of the panel for all the hard work that they've put into it. It's not an easy process, and it is time-consuming, quite a big job, but I can really congratulate everyone or commend everyone that's actually worked on the panel for making the decisions that we have made. I think we've done a pretty good job, so I seek council support.
Thank you. Alderman Edmonds.
Yeah, just to really echo that and know that it's a lot of hard work to build yourself up to put in a grant application and then the work to go through them. So I applaud everyone, and it's not something I had a role in, but it's congratulations to everyone.
Other speakers? Alderman James.
I'd like to pose a question through you, Mr Mayor, to Alderman Kennedy as our rep on this particular committee. And
she'll have the opportunity to answer it in the right of reply, but not during the debate.
Okay. Well, perhaps I may pose my question through you to the appropriate officer. On page 93, 3 applications, 2.5, 3 applications have not been recommended for approval. The first one is the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood Centre and its community yoga. In the explanatory notes that accompany this, the panel agreed to not support this pilot through the community support grants, but to support the pilot from a gentle exercise program through the age-friendly Clarence Plain, as it fits that program's objective towards physical activity. So my question to the appropriate officer, it states there is sufficient funding available. When would this funding be available for this trial program through the age-friendly Clarence Plan so that they have the opportunity to undertake community yoga as part of the Risdon Vale Neighbourhood Centre activities?
Thank you. Mr Toohey.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the funding would be available after tonight's meeting.
Are there any other speakers? Right reply, Alderman Kennedy?
No, I don't think so, Mr Mayor. I just seek council support, and I thank Mr Toohey for his response.
Thank you. So we seek to approve the bids as listed in the agenda. All those in favour? Against? Well, in fact, I can see everyone. That's carried unanimously. Could we please re-invite Alderman Bomberto and Alderman Chong back to the room? Got Alderman Bomberto back, have we? Welcome back, Alderman Bomberto. Item 9 on the agenda concerns Alderman's question time. We have two questions on notice, one from Alderman Mulder, one from Alderman Edmonds. Could I ask the Acting General Manager to respond and table the answers, please?
Through you, Mr Mayor, the responses have been circulated today to all elected members. Alderman Mulder, you received that response. Thank you.
Are you happy to take them as read and ensure that they're included in the minutes for this meeting?
Certainly, Mr Mayor, but I would like to make actually a comment on it.
The opportunity is for a follow-up question, but not an opportunity for a comment per se.
Certainly, Mr Mayor, I can frame a question accordingly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Does the General Manager and the Mayor agree that the response received from Inspector Berry, the Inspector in charge of the Belarus Division, contained the relevance that 93% of people feel safe in public places in the southern half of Tasmania, and that the term crime hotspot is not one that the police use.
Alderman Mulder, it would be disingenuous for me to gainsay the words from the inspector. The response from the inspector is as it stands, and I'm not going to interpret that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was whether the inspector had been accurately reported in the...
Look, I'm sorry, Alderman Mulder. There's no way I'm going to gainsay an inspector of police.
I wasn't asking.
Alderman Edmonds, are you happy with the response that you've got?
Yeah, and just to say thank you very much for providing it so timely.
And we'll ensure
such
that...
a timely manner.
And we will ensure that the response is in the minutes. Thank you. The answers to questions taken at the previous council meeting will take as read, and questions without notice. Could I start with you, Alderman Warren, please? Alderman James?
Yes, Mr Mayor. Two questions. My question through you to Mr Toohey in his capacity as Acting General Manager. Mr Toohey, Council's decision on the Boulevard development. Is Council expecting to receive a large monetary windfall as and when the sale of these blocks will actually eventuate?
Look, I might answer that question, Alderman James. Council obviously has negotiated when the land gets sold, that we be able to sell the land for the value that Value General places on it. In that sense, it's been well and truly planned for a long time.
Thank you, and I like those words, Value General, which is appropriate of.
Thank you.
And the second question is, and I did ask this question at a previous council meeting in relation to the Arm End development, the golf course down at Possum Bay. Is Mr Lovell in a position to advise council as to whether the actual extension of time will be granted for this, given that early October 2022 they run out of their timely permit?
Perhaps I could ask Mr Lovell the status of the planning permit for the Arm End golf course?
Through Mr Mayor, the golf course. The golf course has had its last extension of time. So, I can't remember the exact date, but October sounds about right. And therefore, the only possibility for the golf course to continue is if substantial commencement on the project, as defined under the Act, is reached by that time. Otherwise, there'd be no further extension of time.
Thank you. Alderman Evans.
Yeah, a couple of traffic-related questions tonight. First one is around the Eastside Lutheran School. Have we ever had, or have we had issues raised about safety of students outside that school previously?
Mr Graham?
Through Mr Mayor, not from memory. No, I don't remember recall any in recent times.
Thank you. And the second one is related to the development around the new Salmaker Fresh supermarket. It's a pretty broad one, but do we have any idea when the work will end in that part of town?
Mr Graham?
Mr Mayor, no, I don't have actual timing on that.
I wonder if we can get a bit of a briefing on that in the weekly briefing report. There is a lot of work still going on and areas marked off, which it would be interesting to know when all that's going to be finished. Could I ask Alderman Von Berto whether she's got any questions, please? Okay, I'll ask Alderman Blomley whether he has any questions. Nobody can hear us, but it seems. I'll continue, come back. Alderman Pearce.
Thank you, Mayor. And I'll raise this question because maybe Mr Graham can tell me if it's ours or not. I was down at Lauderdale at the weekend, and where the water carriers fill up, I mean, there's that much water on the ground now. Can something be done? And I don't even know if it's ours. That's why I'm raising the question tonight. I mean, it's got the stage where before there was a little bit of water, now it's just like a river, and it's not looking good. And if it's ours, I don't know what we can do, but geez, we should be able to do something there. It doesn't look good.
Mr Graham.
I'll follow through with that one, Mr Mayor, and advise Alderman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Alderman Walker.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First question is in relation to reviews of committees. When do you deem it an optimal time to do this, and is this something that has the remotest possibility of occurring in this term of council?
Mr Tilley, you got any information there? I'm not aware of any review that we've actually commenced, that's for sure.
The review hasn't commenced. It's normal practice to review the membership of committees after an election. However, the question really pertains to actually reviewing the committees to see if we're satisfied with their constitution, we're satisfied with their purpose. That hasn't commenced.
Can we take that on notice? I seem to recall that council was of a mind to do that before the election, so we will be in touch on that one.
Thank you. Second question relates to the fact that now that we've ticked over into May, it's now been over 3 years since council unanimously passed a motion I moved in April 2019, being that council undertakes a review of the 2013 Bellreeve Bluff Foreshore Master Plan, and a suspension of associated schedule works is put in place until completion of the review. The review is to be concluded prior to the end of the 19 calendar year. I understand that things morphed into something more substantive, but I think can I get a flesh out of when we might actually be doing even some stuff around that particular part of the section, because I think good faith was entered into by the Land Care Group, and it's now 3 years since.
Mr Graham.
Through you, Mr Mayor, the next phase of the master plan is a workshop with council proposed for June this year.
Will that still fit within our budgeting parameters to be considering that?
Mr Graham, are there any projects that you've got listed in the draft budget that pertain to the implementation of work around the Bellreeve Bluff?
Through Mr Mayor, I don't recall any in the draft capital program that's gone to council, but we'll review that in terms of when the next budget pack goes out.
Thank you. Alderman Kennedy.
No, thank you, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I've previously flagged these at meetings of council, but my question is that in 2021-2, what is council's projected wage and salary bill by class of employee, that is team leader, coordinators, business unit officers and project management staff with no staff? And what was the total of budget allocation for 21-22 capital expenditure works program? And what was the grant funding for other sources for that capital works program? That is, what was council's contribution or expected contribution towards those projects?
Ms Burrow, are you able to help us in this regard, or do you need to take it on notice?
Yes, through you, Mr Mayor. The first one I think I'll take on notice to get those details for you by category. The second one I can provide some information. Our capital program for 21-22 is $21,450,000. Of that, 500,000 was grants received.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. My second question relates to the demise of the ice skating rink at Glenorchy and some of the deep concerns. Given our capacity to find money for things like squash centres, but not for golf courses, what is the criteria by which we might think of handing out and making Clarence the centre of the ice capital of Tasmania?
Be purely a matter for council, Alderman Mulder.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Alderman Chong.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. If we are going to have a review of the dog policy in relation to a number of categories of dogs, so greyhounds and working dogs, can we also look at assistance dogs and how we might consider assistance dogs?
That'd be a matter for council, Alderman
Indeed.
John.
That's why it's a question.
Alderman Von Berto, do you have any questions?
Through you, Mr Mayor, we seem to be having a communications problem. Alderman Von Berto has advised me that she does have 2 questions.
Ah, there you go. She's there.
Someone on a ukulele.
Yes.
Please go ahead, Alderman Von Berto.
Or not.
Can you get her on the phone, please? Alderman Blomley, are you able to hear us?
I am, Mr Mayor. Can you hear me?
Do you have any questions?
I do.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Mr Mayor, early last week I was contacted by a resident who's a regular user of the Rosley Golf Course, or was the Rosley Golf Course, a wonderful green space area in our city. And I appreciate last Monday was Anzac Day, public holiday, but he sent through a photograph to me of a collapsed culvert, one of the main walking tracks. I sent that through to the elected member portal to be investigated and to be rectified. I'm told that as of this afternoon, it's still in a state of disrepair and quite dangerous. Nearly a week later, I'm hoping that it might be possible, Mr Mayor, as a matter of urgency, to have one of our crews tomorrow go out to that main walking park and just secure the collapsed culvert so there are no accidents.
Question. Mr Graham?
Through Mr Mayor, I'll follow up on
Thank
that
you.
one.
Second one, Alderman Blomley. We've lost you now.
What's the sound?
Sorry, Alderman Blomley, we've lost the sound for you now. Okay, thank you. If you're able to send through an email for the question, we'll try and get a response to you. And I think Alderman Von Berto, if you could read out her questions, please.
Through you, Mr Mayor. Alderman Von Berto's first question is in 2 parts. First part, last council meeting I asked what uses and or programs are taking place or are going to take place in the Alma's Activity Centre building. The General Manager advised this matter would be discussed at the Alderman's workshop on the 26th of April. At that workshop, apart from considering its use as staff accommodation, there was no other discussion of the uses of the building. When will Alma start to be used again and for what purposes? As it's been empty on the ground floor for approximately a year.
Thank you. Mr Graham, are you able to help us there?
I'll have to take that one on notice, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. Second question.
The part B of this question, what is the status of the lease by the Hobart FM radio station on the upstairs level of Alma's Activity Centre?
Through Mr Mayor, that's probably a governance question, that one, but I'll take that one on notice and deal with governance.
Thank you.
The second question...
Is that 3 questions?
The first one was in 2 parts.
Yes,
Alderman. Can the Alderman be appraised on a weekly basis by the written Alderman's weekly briefing of staff who have left or have joined the Council, and also for the number and details of the unfilled positions within the organisation?
I'll pass that request to the General Manager.
Yes, I'll take that on notice. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us to the end of question time and at the end of the open meeting. So if we could close the feed, please, and thank those members of the public that have been with us.